The pathways of Titanum Forest hadn't been tended to in years. The fairies of the realm rarely left, and it was even more rare that they received visitors. The strange and often dangerous plants of the forest had retaken most of them, lying in wait for unsuspecting prey. However, there were still safe routes if you knew where to look. Melisari knew the paths of the forest like the back of her hand. She led the group, with Yeldarb and Ysara in tow. The elf's eyes remained fixed on the horizon, but Yeldarb found himself nervously glancing at the verdant and lush foliage beneath his feet.
"Are you sure these plants aren't going to attack? I've heard some pretty terrifying stories about this place,"
Yeldarb said, trying desperately to mask the fear in his voice.
"I'd like to see them try. I'll burn them to a crisp,"
Ysara said.
"You'll do no such thing,"
Yeldarb shouted. Ysara laughed.
"Relax, Yeldarb, I'm just kidding."
Melisari glanced back at the two companions behind her.
"The young Talion possesses fire magic,"
she asked. Yeldarb sighed.
"Something like that."
They continued their journey in silence for some time before Ysara spoke up again.
"Hey, Melisari, how come you know this forest so well? Aren't you from Avondale?"
she asked.
"I am, but there was a time when the children of the World Tree were united. Elves and fairies once lived together in harmony,"
Melisari replied, her voice laced with nostalgia.
"What happened? We came to a disagreement, one that could not be resolved. So we went our separate ways. The elves stayed in Avondale, and the fairies sought refuge here."
Ysara sighed.
"Oh, that sounds rough. What could have possibly driven you apart like that?"
Yeldarb jumped in, eager to take his mind off the terrifying flora that surrounded him.
"Oh, I can answer that. The elves of Devine wished to open their borders and trade with the other races of Devine. The fairies, on the other hand, wished to remain secluded and did not trust the other kingdoms of the realm. Such polarizing worldviews cannot coexist."
Melisari stifled a smile.
"Correct. You know your Devine history, it seems."
Yeldarb grinned.
"Ha-ha! It's a fascinating subject."
Melisari stopped and held out her hand. Yeldarb and Ysara froze. Ahead of them, the narrow path opened up into a clearing. It was filled with tiny buildings, made from wooden walls and woven leaves for the rooftops. The tallest of them only came up to Yeldarb's waist, but the craftsmanship was undeniable.
"Is this the fairy village?"
Yeldarb asked. Melisari nodded.
"One of them. Why is it empty?"
Ysara asked. Melisari pointed ahead.
"I'm more concerned with that. That species of tree is not native to Titanum."
Yeldarb and Ysara's gaze followed Melisari's finger until they spotted a tree in the center of the village that towered above all the buildings. Its bark was a faded golden color, and its leaves were a dull gray. It certainly looked different than any other tree or plant they had seen thus far on their journey.
"Where does that type of tree come from?"
Yeldarb asked. Melisari took another step forward and pulled the bow from her back.
"Avondale."
The three entered the village slowly, following Melisari's lead. As the trio approached the tree, a muffled sound filled the air. It sounded like screaming. They froze.
"Where is that coming from?"
Ysara asked. Melisari stepped forward and pressed her ear against the tree's pale trunk.
"It's coming from inside the tree. Someone's trapped in there."
Yeldarb ran over and pressed his ear against the trunk as well.
"Titans be damned, she's right! We need to free them!"
Yeldarb pulled the dagger and wand from his belt and approached the tree. Melisari reached out and grabbed his wrist before he could drive the blade down.
"What are you doing?"
he asked.
"This tree should not exist here, which means that magic must have been involved. If the fairies trapped this person in there, they must have done so for a reason."
Yeldarb lowered his blade.
"I suppose that's fair. What should we do then?"
Melisari examined the tree closely, running her fingers across the half-dead leaves. Yeldarb felt something moving around in his pack. He opened it and looked down. The Kintari stone Fintan had given them was glowing a bright yellow color. It leapt around the bag like an excited child.
"Looks like Fintan is trying to reach us. I'll see what he wants," Yeldarb said.
Melisari nodded.
"Don't go too far. Plenty of hungry plants in this area."
"Lovely. Don't worry, I won't."
Yeldarb walked to the edge of the village and pulled the Kintari stone out of the bag. It was flashing in his palm.
"How do you use this thing?"
he asked. He tapped the surface, and suddenly the sounds of the world around him went quiet. The voice of Fintan Merrybrook filled his ears.
"Yeldarb, can you hear me?"
Fintan asked.
"Yes, it's working."
"Oh, good. Listen, are you at the fairy village?"
Yes, we just arrived.
Good, good. I wanted to warn you. I came across a sellsword shortly after you left. He goes by Blackheart. He's looking for a fairy named Solara Dreamweaver. He must not find her. Do you understand?
Yes, but the fairy village is empty.
Never mind that. They're probably hiding after everything that's happened. If you find Solara, tell her that I sent you,
Finton said.
And what about the sellsword? Yeldarb asked.
If you cross paths with him, do not engage. I sent Sarai to follow him, and I haven't heard back from her. He's dangerous. I believe he's in...
A shrill sound cut through Finton's words like a bolt of lightning. Pain seared behind Yeldarb's eyes. The sounds of the forest returned swiftly. The sudden interruption still left his ears ringing.
Ah! What happened?
Yeldarb asked, tapping the stone.
Finton! Are you there?
Yeldarb heard a voice behind him. He spun around and spotted a knight talking to Melisari and Isara. A black, hooded cloak swung in the soft breeze behind him. His hand rested on the hilt of his blade. Yeldarb slid the Kintari stone back into his bag and approached slowly.
We got interrupted. Who is this?
This is Blackheart, Melisari said. The knight turned to face him with a cold stare. Yeldarb's eyes immediately wandered to the scar that spanned from the bottom of his eye to the center of his cheek. A bitter smell filled the air.
2 Talions and an elf traveling through an uninhabited forest. What are the odds?
Blackheart asked.
We are merely here seeking the counsel of the fairies,
Yeldarb replied. Blackheart nodded.
As am I. Have you seen this one?
He pulled out a rolled parchment and unfurled it. Painted across the surface was the visage of a fairy. Yeldarb committed her features to memory.
The village was empty when we arrived,
Melisari said. Blackheart rolled the parchment back up and put it in his bag.
What business do you have with the fairies?
He asked.
We're part of a new adventurers guild called the Order of the Pawn. We're here because there have been reports of the rot being seen outside Avondale,
Isara said.
Damn it, Isara, he doesn't need to know that,
Yeldarb shouted. Blackheart smiled as his hand curled around the hilt of his blade.
Thank you, my young Talion friend. That's actually quite helpful.
Blackheart ripped the sword from his sheath. Yeldarb, Isara, and Melisari all drew their own weapons.
If you all leave now,
I will spare your lives,
Blackheart said, his eyes scanning the 3 fighters.
There are 3 of us and 1 of you. You're outnumbered. Surrender, and we shall offer you the same mercy,
Melisari replied. Blackheart's grin widened. Oh, my dear elf. Even with the 3 of you,
this will be far from a fair fight.
Yeldarb's heart skipped a beat as he saw black tendrils sweep across the irises of Blackheart's eyes.
By the Titans, he's infected!
Yeldarb screamed. Blackheart shot forward with inhuman speed. He grabbed Yeldarb with his free hand and lifted him by the neck. Yeldarb looked down as Blackheart's eyes filled with a blackness that rivaled the night sky.
You should have fled when you had the chance,
Blackheart shouted. Yeldarb's vision began to blur as he frantically reached for the wand at his side. He managed to curl his fingers around the base of the wand just as Blackheart let out a yelp.
Ugh!
He let go of Yeldarb, dropping him onto the ground below. Yeldarb looked up and saw an arrow sticking out of the knight's back. It was lodged between his breastplate and his shoulder armor. His eyes shot over to Melisari, who readied another arrow. Isara ran to Yeldarb's side, helping him to his feet.
Yeldarb, should I transform?
She asked. Yeldarb shook his head, still gasping for breath.
No, absolutely not. You'll burn the forest down.
Blackheart ripped the arrow out of his back and gripped his sword with both hands as he approached Melisari.
Tell me, elf, how does it feel to know you escaped the rot, only to be later ended by its hand?
Blackheart asked, raising the sword above his head.
I will have vengeance for my people!
Melisari screamed, pulling back another arrow. She let the arrow fly. Blackheart spun to the right and dodged it with ease. He moved so fast that his silhouette blurred, leaving only a shadow where he once stood. Melisari readied another arrow.
How is this possible?
Blackheart laughed.
The rot offers power beyond comprehension.
Yeldarb approached from behind, his wand at the ready.
Blizzara, in Sola Shakar!
Shards of ice formed in the air and shot into Blackheart's back. The impact sent ice crawling across his armor, freezing the joints and locking him in place.
Damn Talion and their magic!
He shouted, struggling against the ice that encased him. Yeldarb drew his dagger and leapt into the air. He brought the blade down toward Blackheart's neck. A pair of black tendrils shot out from inside Blackheart's armor. They curled around Yeldarb's wrist and ceased his approach. He dangled in the air as Blackheart broke free of the ice. Yeldarb screamed as the tendrils tossed him across the clearing. He hit one of the trees on the edge of the village and collapsed onto the ground.
Yeldarb!
Isara shouted, rushing to his side once more. Blackheart turned his attention back to Melisari. The tendrils that had emerged from his back floated above him. His smile dripped with black ichor that ran down his neck. She saw herself reflected in the obsidian orbs that had replaced his eyes.
Time to finish the job,
Blackheart said, gripping his sword. Melisari was frozen, paralyzed by fear. She could practically hear the screams of her people echoing in her mind. The sword shot forward, and Melisari watched as the blade slid effortlessly through her skin. It drove through her stomach, bursting out her back as the metallic taste of blood filled her mouth. The pain felt distant. The cold metal retracted, leaving a gaping hole in her torso. She collapsed onto the ground. The world spun around her as the screams of her people still echoed in her mind.
And so ends the story of the elves,
Blackheart whispered. He turned away from her as she bled out on the forest floor. Blackheart approached the tree that did not belong and dug his gauntlets into the bark. He ripped the tree open with ease, sending shards of wood scattering across the clearing. From within, a scrawny man emerged. The veins in his skin ran black. He smiled through rotting teeth at the sight of Blackheart.
Took you long enough. So, what seed did you come from?
He asked. The man's eyes went wide.
No. You're the original, aren't you?
Blackheart didn't respond.
Tell me, will I still be me after it's over?
He asked.
I don't know, and I don't care,
Blackheart replied. The man nodded.
Well, it beats being stuck in that damn tree. Let's get this over with.
Yeldarb and Isara approached slowly from the left side of the village. They paused as Blackheart wrapped his armored hands around the man's throat. His jaw unhinged like a snake's, dropping down to accommodate the whole of the man's head. With a single, terrifying bite, he swallowed the man from inside the tree whole. Yeldarb and Isara watched in horror as Blackheart's jaw snapped back into place. Wisps of black smoke began pouring out from inside his armor.
Much better,
he said. Yeldarb spotted Melisari from across the clearing. He could see the gaping wound in her stomach. She looked like she was still breathing.
Melisari is wounded,
Yeldarb whispered. Isara turned to Yeldarb.
You know what needs to happen.
Yeldarb nodded.
Right. Do it. Kill the bastard.
Isara nodded, closing her eyes. Yeldarb darted across the clearing and rushed to Melisari's side. Her blood soaked the ground beneath her. If she weren't an elf, she would have been long dead.
Melisari, can you hear me?
Yeldarb asked. Her eyes fluttered as she looked around for the source of the voice.
World Tree, is that you?
She asked. Yeldarb carefully picked her up. She cried out in pain as he lifted her.
Ah!
I'm sorry, but we have to get out of here,
Yeldarb whispered, carrying her into the forest. Back in the clearing, Isara approached Blackheart from behind, her fists clenched at her sides. Blackheart didn't bother to turn around.
I admire your spirit, girl, but you don't stand a chance against me.
Maybe not,
Isara said, her voice shifting.
But he does!
Blackheart's eyes went wide. He spun around as Isara's body exploded into flames. The young Talion girl grew to a towering height in the blink of an eye. Within seconds, a rage demon towered above Titanum's canopy. The rage demon turned its horned head toward the sky and let loose a roar that shook the very foundations of Devine. Its brimstone fists shot downward, crashing into the center of the village. Blackheart rolled out of the way, watching as liquid fire drenched the space where he was standing. He looked up at the towering beast.
Nice trick.
The rage demon swept its leg across the length of the village, turning nearly half of the tiny buildings into smoldering ruins. Blackheart tried to run, but even with his inhuman speed, he couldn't outrun such a massive foe. The hooved foot of the demon crashed into his armor, scorching the metal as it sent him flying into the trees. Blackheart landed hard. He stood to his feet and slid his sword into the holster at his side. He looked back at the demon one last time.
I got what I came here for. Looks like we'll have to finish this fight another day, he said, fleeing into the forest.
The rage demon was losing control. It spun in place, kicking down trees and crushing buildings with its fists. It had lost sight of its target, now consumed only by anger and a lust for destruction. Fire took hold of Titanum, spreading away from the village. Yeldarb was nearby, still carrying Melisari as her warm blood soaked his hands. He coughed as smoke filled his lungs. This was precisely what he had feared. He paused and looked around, fearful that Blackheart would sneak up on them.
I have to stop her,
he said. Yeldarb slowly lowered Melisari toward the ground.
I'll be right back.
He pulled out his wand. The sound of rushing water filled his ears. Confused, Yeldarb turned around just as a wave crashed into him. He fell backward as water rushed by all around him. He stood up quickly, wiping the excess liquid from his face and spinning around.
Where did that come from?
He asked. He looked over to where the rage demon had been moments before. It was gone. The fires were gone too, replaced only by smoldering trees and wisps of smoke. Had the wave extinguished everything? Yeldarb heard movement to his left. He turned and raised his wand as a small creature emerged from between the trees. Isara stood behind, her skin covered in ash and soot. It was a fairy. She had the form of a woman in miniature form. She moved through the air, carried by tiny wings that fluttered behind her. She had green skin and deep violet eyes that regarded Yeldarb with suspicion. He recognized the fairy from the portrait Blackheart had been carrying. This was Solara Dreamweaver.
You nearly burned down the forest,
she said. Yeldarb gestured to his wet clothes.
That wave just now. Was that you?
He asked. Solara nodded.
If I hadn't intervened, your friend here would have burned the forest down.
Well, thank you. I'm sorry, but we had to resort to desperate measures. That knight just now was infected with the rot, but he somehow retained his humanity. He was strong. Too strong. Please, we need your help. My friend here, she's gravely wounded,
Yeldarb said, gesturing to Melisari. The fairy's eyes softened as she looked down at the elf lying on the ground nearby.
Yes, I saw the entire fight. I may be able to save her, but first you must tell me what you're doing in our forest. Who sent you?
We were sent by a bard named Fintan Merrybrook,
Yeldarb replied. Solara's eyes lit up at the sound of Fintan's name.
Come with me. We have much to discuss.